The event that we're going to be hosting is called New Leadership for Changing Times. And we're speaking today with three very smart CEOs about what they're doing to handle crises. I want to thank SJR, the sponsor of this event, for making it possible for us to bring those CEOs to you today. I also want to thank our guests all around the world who are tuning in. Remember, you can follow along using the hashtag Axios Events and follow us on Twitter at Axios. A reminder also, you can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and on the Axios homepage. With that, I'd love to bring in our first guest, who is Julie Sweet, the CEO of Accenture. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Julie, you run a big company. I believe you have 500,000 employees worldwide. You exist in over 120 countries. What were you doing to ensure that those people, those hundreds of thousands of people, were going to be safe during the coronavirus crisis? And how did you get them to transition to virtual work so quickly?
Well, thanks, Sarah. Well, one thing that not everyone realizes is we were in a very unique position because actually for over 3 decades, Accenture has not had a headquarters. And so my entire leadership team is virtual. For example, my COO is in Belgium, and my CFO and I, this is the first time in 35 years that the CFO and CEO of Accenture have been in the same office. So at the top leadership, it was quite an easy shift. And many of our people, because we work with clients, are used to remote working. And so what we really focused on is that remote working in our centers, so we have advanced technology and operation centers around the world, is not common. So we had to make sure that they were able to move remotely. But I think it was as important is that really focus on sustaining our people's mental well-being during this time, because people have been working, they're at much more stress. And so we've done a lot of focus on sustaining our people.
And how did you do that in terms of mental health? What did you offer your employees?
Well, actually, just prior to the crisis, we had partnered with Thrive, who we worked, Arianna Huffington's company, for many years. And they have a program for mental well-being. And we had actually rolled that out. And then they worked with us to make it in smaller increments. And we also had a website that had, basic things like exercising at your desk, which I used every day, and a lot of different tips from experts. And it became something that people really used. Not just something on the portal, and people talked about it, and I would talk about it to lead by example. And we've just had a terrific response from our people about this investment. And then, of course, we were doing lots of connections with leaders and connecting people in terms of, different support.
In terms of preparedness, we're seeing a theme that the companies that took steps like your company did to ensure employee safety and mental health before the crisis were really much better prepared during the crisis. What are some themes that you've seen from your clients that have made them more successful or less successful when it came to handling this pandemic?
Well, Sarah, actually, what you point out to is something that is a theme really across the board. On the one hand, most of our clients did a fantastic job responding to a crisis, and so I think they're, how they did it. It might have been harder or not, but many of the CEOs today are saying, "Look, we don't want to go back because we're so good at responding to the crisis." But what you're really starting to see now is that there is a difference between those who've invested. Of course, what you talked about in terms of investing in well-being and people has been very important, but we're also seeing it in terms of the adapting of their businesses. So we did research before the crisis that said the top 10% of companies who've done digital transformation, adopted technology, and that were performing better, twice as well as the bottom 25%. And overnight, that gap has become almost a chasm because those who had done the investments in advance were able to adjust much more quickly to everything going online, to a contactless world, and to being able to connect, whether it's B2B or B2C, with their customers.
Julie, it's an interesting time. I'm coming to you about 3 blocks up from the White House in my home in Washington, D.C., where there have been protests all day and all night for weeks. You and your company have addressed some of these protests and what's been happening with them. And we have an audience question that I wanted to ask you, which was in a statement that you released to your employees, you shared that you've committed yourself to increasing the number of people of color in positions of power, like managing directors. Now, given the pay inequity often faced by people of color, especially within large corporations like yours, what will you do to be transparent and ensure that pay equity is not only happening across gender, but also across race, and that it's going to be a sustainable policy for the rest of the years that your company exists?
It's a great question. And one of the things that I really focus on, because pay inequity is completely solvable, and we solved that 6 years ago. 6 years ago, we put in a rigorous process using an outside advisor who does an independent analysis every year. And by the way, from the beginning, we have looked at all forms of diversity, including white people, right? So we look across categories. And every year, we do that. If we find a problem, we fix it regardless of category. And so that is an institutionalized part of who Accenture is. And I love the question, because my message to other CEOs and organizations is there are a lot of things that take a while that are cultural change, but addressing pay inequity is completely within our control as companies.
Julie, we have just a few minutes here. I want to ask, what are these two crises coming together at this pivotal time ahead of an election mean for the future of corporate leadership? How will corporate leaders and CEOs like yourself need to adapt to this new reality?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that, in fact, we are having in the US this moment of time, because we need to address racism and racial inequality. And the CEOs that I am speaking to, and organizations that I'm proud to be a part of, like the Business Roundtable, are saying this is a moment where we must take action, and it must be sustained change. And so, what it means for corporate leadership is that we need to, and I believe we are going to take a step, take that step, make this a moment of change to have the impact that we can have on fighting racism and creating opportunity for our communities of color.
And last question for you, Julie. What have you personally learned as a CEO? How have you personally grown during this time that will inform the rest of your tenure as a leader at Accenture?
There's really two things. So, one, from a pure business perspective and performance as a CEO, I was a new CEO as of September 1st, so not that many months ago. And the advice that I received from fantastic CEOs was that you need to move fast, you need to put the right leadership team in. And I followed that advice. And as of March 1st, we put in a new growth model, we had a brand new leadership team. And moving quickly was something that I could never anticipated, that I was going to have a global pandemic, but it's made all the difference in the world. And so I will tell you forever, I will say that's my lesson. Then on a personal and a people level, as much as people talk about being remote, what has mattered has been the human connections. And I have been so inspired by what's happened in our communities and our company. And we must never lose sight that it is always needs to be human first, right? It is humans and human ingenuity that will drive the positive change. And I think we've all felt that, as for the first time ever, everyone has been touched by the same crises.
Those are two very powerful takeaways for our audience. Move quickly and also be human first. Julie Sweet, CEO of Accenture, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and it's a great series, so I'm glad you're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And now I want to turn it over to my boss, Axios CEO Jim Vandehei, with a view from the top interview with Alex Jukowitz, the CEO of SJR.
Thank you, Sarah. It is now my pleasure to bring you a conversation with Alex Jukowicz, who is the CEO of SJR. Thank you for making this program, this discussion about leadership possible. You spend a lot of time studying leadership. You guys do the CEO leaderboard where you're really thinking about what works, what doesn't work, who's successful, who's not. What have you learned from all the research that you've done about leadership, especially as it applies to this amazing moment where you have these twin crises unfolding before our eyes?
Well, first, let me just say it's a privilege to be here and to get to have this conversation with you. First, to look at what's happening today in terms of leadership, we've got to look back. We've always thought, and I've always believed, that thought leadership and ideas coming from leaders and CEOs made a significant difference. However, I spent a lot of time talking about it and very little time quantifying that idea until the last year we made a pretty fervent commitment to try to develop an index and see where leadership shone, where it kind of presented itself, and where it made a difference. Now, what we could never have imagined then was to have a moment in time that everyone was going to be going through COVID and now the follow-on civil and social unrest. And what it's allowed us to do is to be able to see better and more dynamically those that step up, those that engage, those that break through with ideas that actually care as much about their employees as the people that buy their products. Those different sort of manifestations, particularly socially, have sort of painted a picture of true leadership and where it's going and how you actually navigate it and what are sort of things that you do and things that you don't do.
And people love like news you can use. Like, I'm a CEO. Lots of people watching this program are leaders or aspiring leaders. Like, be specific. Like, what are the things that you think work, particularly in a moment? And maybe what's one or two things that definitely doesn't work that people thought worked a couple of years ago?
Well, first and foremost, somehow when we get to a company, we think we either everybody knows what we do or they know who we are. You've got to engage. And you have to engage on a human level and a multifaceted level. I sort of think about it that there's been an evolution of leadership. Leadership used to be sort of dynamically thinking about what's good for your organization, then is good for the rest of the world. And what's good for the bottom line is good for the rest of the world. We evolved then into the world of purpose, which has kind of mushed together and conflated ideas about what we stand for and how we impact the world. The reality now in a post-COVID environment, it's a form of servant leadership. You first have to care about the world at large. You have to care about the people inside of your house and outside of your house. And you have to be able to, day in and day out, show that the collar matches the cuff. And often it doesn't. So when you're asking about what isn't done, the reality is that we all sort of think that we're impacting and absolutely articulating what it is that we believe and we stand for. And most of the time, we avoid saying something. We spend a lot of time, communications has been more about a lack of communication and a little bit of navel gazing and self-serving as opposed to selfless behavior in an environment where, as I said earlier, like as a marketer or communicator, everybody's always talking about the white space and the big idea. There is no other white space or master narrative in this world than COVID and the civil and social unrest that is going on in this country. Everything else takes a backseat to that. And if you're not a part of what that means and what the relevance it is for your employees and your consumers and your stakeholders, you're not really a part of anything.
One of the things we found as a newer company, 4 years old, is and most of our employees are younger. They're under the age of 35. If you can nail it, if you can actually speak to your higher purpose and find things to talk about that are relevant and real and authentic in moments like this, I find that people work harder than ever. They just respond to different incentives. They're not as worried about profit or paycheck. They're super worried about, like, am I personally and are we collectively doing something important, doing something good, doing something big?
So roughly speaking, there's three kinds of young people coming out of school. There's those that sort of want to clearly pursue a career path and have economic outcomes as their main motivation. Then there's a swath of people that are committed to making the world a better place. The large swath of people that we all hire from and that we have are a combination of things. They want to have a better workplace. They want to have a better world. They want to have economic opportunity. And they also know that it can all happen in one place. And they expect an employer and they expect corporations to deliver on that. And if it isn't consistent and if it doesn't match what they do in the United States as what they do abroad, or what they do with their employees as how you treat your consumers or how you navigate stakeholders, if all of these things are not in concert, they're not aligned strategically, and they don't have a true benefit, then that's going to get called out again, again, and again.
If you look at the Fortune 1000 companies, you look at the list of people leading them, it is strikingly white, it is strikingly male, and it is strikingly old. Will it require a different generation of leaders to really usher in this change? Or when you're advising companies, like, what do you tell somebody who hasn't done these things how to become comfortable and instantly start doing them?
Well, I mean, the first thing, you just hit upon it. You've got to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is good. Comfortable isn't good. Success and comfort shouldn't be so aligned as they are today. In discomfort, we all throw words around like disruption and transformation. Okay, well, let's disrupt and transform. And you know what? Overdo it. Go to the extreme. Push the envelope. I don't think it's going to take a next generation, because luckily we're so interconnected that next generation is all that maturation is happening faster and faster now. So we're going to go through those cycles. We're going to see a different way of forming both public company leadership structures, the way startup world. Look, I mean, we still have a world that excludes instead of includes. And the only way you're going to do that is by overdoing it and actually going to the extreme. And then there'll be some course correction to find what is the sort of prosperous middle.
Alex, thank you for a fascinating conversation. Thank you to SJR for making this broader conversation possible. There's nothing, I think, that matters more in this moment than leadership and people figuring out how to navigate it correctly. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate your support. And back to you, Sara.
Thank you so much, Jim. We're now joined by Larry Merlo, the president and CEO of CVS Health Corp. Larry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sara, it's great to be here. Thanks.
So Larry, CVS has almost 10,000 stores across the United States. And what's so unique about the company is that during the coronavirus pandemic, those stores were considered essential services, meaning your employees still needed to go to work every day. How did you manage employee safety while a huge pandemic was going viral throughout the United States?
Well, Sara, it's a great question. And when all of this came upon us, one of the things that we always work hard to do is understand what are the challenges that we need to solve for. And in answering that question, developing a set of guiding principles. And as we approached and attacked the realities of the pandemic, one of those guiding principles was the safety and security of our employees and our customers. And so we spent a lot of time understanding what exactly are their needs. Obviously there was a big focus on personal protective equipment, but there was also the reality of how do we give our colleagues, our employees, peace of mind. They too were dealing with personal issues in their home life. Many of our employees have children. We saw daycare centers being closed within a matter of hours, all across the country. So we did a number of things in terms of enhancing, our employee benefits and, providing dependent care for our employees with children, or, even our employees who served as a caregiver for perhaps a parent or a grandparent. We added some additional benefits, especially for our part-time workers. And, one of the things that we were all as a country trying to figure out is, the characteristics, the symptoms, the duration of, COVID-19. And, we wanted to make sure that our employees who perhaps didn't feel well or, had the sniffles, that, under normal circumstances, they may have come to work, but we wanted them to stay home. And, we wanted to make sure that they had the peace of mind so that they didn't have to, make a decision between a paycheck, and staying in the security and safety, of their home as they were working to feel better. So, we did a number of those things. And, Look, I couldn't be prouder of the work and the efforts of our colleagues across the company. One of our goals as a company, our purpose, is to help people on their path to better health. And, there were countless examples of, what we saw from our colleagues, doing things to, help their customers, help their communities, manage through this crisis while they too, were dealing with those same dynamics in their personal lives.
And Larry, while we're still talking about the coronavirus and things that your employees were doing and colleagues were doing to help each other out, you all set up, I think it was 1,000 testing centers in your parking lots. How did that work, and how were you able to set those up so quickly?
Well, Sarah, one of the things, I think it was back in late March where we opened our first testing site. It was in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and we learned a tremendous amount from that first store. And what that led to was working with officials both at a federal level as well as a state level in opening what we described as large-scale testing sites. And we were utilizing the parking lots of closed facilities, and we were testing up to 1,000 individuals a day at those sites. And wow. As we all learned more about the virus, and as we began to plan for reopening the economies, it's critically important to make testing broadly available in communities across the country. We took those learnings, and as you mentioned, we were able to scale within 30 days 10,000 testing sites utilizing our drive-throughs in CVS locations across the country. So we're not doing testing from within the store, we're doing it from our drive-through, and we now have tested more than 400,000 individuals. So we're really proud of what we've been able to do. We hear about testing every day, and and the need to increase the availability of testing. And not only have we done that with our CVS locations, but we've also seen the population health data that minority populations have been disproportionately impacted by the virus. So we have worked with community leaders to bring our testing capabilities and our healthcare professionals into those underserved communities and make testing broadly available for them as well. So again, our CVS teams just absolutely did a wonderful job in terms of stepping up with a heightened sense of urgency to make this a reality.
Larry, a lot of companies are going to be looking at CVS as a model for how to handle reintegration back into work because your employees have already remained in stores. How would you advise CEOs reintegrate people back to work moving forward?
Well, Sarah, another great question. And, back to those guiding principles that, that we established, another guiding principle is communication. And, and again, we've learned a tremendous amount in terms of not just the frequency of the communication, but ensuring that the communication's two ways, and making sure that what is on our colleagues, our employees' minds, is what we're addressing. We're providing answers to. And I think one of the things that we and quite frankly, as I've talked to other CEOs, many companies have learned is we had a work from home program that existed. As we think about our back office employees, we probably had about 20 to 25% that work from home. But since the March timeframe, we have close to 90,000 of our colleagues who have been working remotely, well over 90%. And so we're looking to bring those colleagues back in a very phased approach, working with the guidelines established by state governors. And I think we're comforted by the fact that we've been able to continue to very effectively managing this company working remotely. And I think one of the other things, Sarah, that we and many other companies are evaluating that how does this new normal that we're experiencing today, how does it become part of tomorrow's everyday routines? And is there an opportunity to expand a remote workforce and the flexibility Larry, that creates?
Yes, thank you so much. And while we're there, we just have 1 minute with you. So I wanted to make sure we picked your brain about this. What are you
Sure.
as a CEO doing right now during this time when everyone's on lockdown? Are you working from home? Have you changed your habits? What does a CEO do differently right now?
Yeah, Sarah, I have changed my habits. I have gone to the office, infrequently, and to spend time with, some of the colleagues that are important that they continue to work on site. But I would say that the vast majority of my work schedule is working from home. And, I have certainly become more technologically enabled in terms of, whether it's, webinars or Microsoft Teams or Zoom, and I think that has helped me catch up to the current technology capabilities that exist.
Larry Merlo, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated it. We've learned so much from you, and best of luck to you and the rest of your team navigating through these crisis times. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you again to Larry for joining us, and thank you again to Jim for hosting that interview with Alex Jutkowitz. Before we let you go, just a quick wrap of some of the things we learned today. I love what Lynn Sweet said about moving quickly in leadership to implement change and being human first. What Alex said, you've got to be uncomfortable if you really want to disrupt and transform. And I love what Larry said at the top, that a priority should be giving employees peace of mind. I want to thank you all again for joining us today for this virtual event. A reminder, we're going to be hosting these almost every week here at Axios, and you can tune in on our website and all of our channels across social media. Another reminder to sign up for Axios newsletters if you want to get more reporting on this at signup.axios.com. Thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.